Stop what you are doing. Because what is happening to the global economy right now is not a dip. It is not a correction. And it is not something that is going to blow over in a new cycle. One economist saw 2008 coming 3 years before it happened. While every mainstream institution on the planet called it a great year, this man was pointing at the exact mechanism that was going to bring the whole thing down. And he was right. He has spent 55 years building the framework to see what others miss. And right now, in 2026, he is saying this is worse. The structure underneath what we are watching is more dangerous than anything he has seen since the crisis he predicted. So before you hear what he is saying, look at the numbers already on the board. Soil prices. Up 9% today alone. Not this week. Today. Crude oil. Up 20% in the last few weeks. Not a quarter. Not a year. Weeks. Every stock that was already falling is falling harder. Every index that had already turned downward has turned further. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The last time a shock with this exact profile hit the global economy, the stock market did not recover. It lost 45% of its total value. Gold did not inch upward. Gold went up over 2,000%. That was 1973. And the man who predicted 2008 is telling you that 1973 is the right comparison for right now. So why is gold moving the way it is moving? Here is the simple version. Every time a conflict of this scale breaks out and people start genuinely questioning whether the institutions they have trusted their entire financial lives are going to hold, the answer is always the same. They stop trusting paper. They ask, if this whole thing cracks, what actually preserves me? And the answer they keep arriving at, across every culture, across every economic crisis in recorded history, is gold. Gold is not going up because of a trade. Gold is going up because millions of people around the world, independently, are arriving at the same conclusion at the same time. The financial system is under a stress it may not be able to absorb. And when people reach that conclusion, they move. Every single time. Now here is where this gets important. Because there is a man who has been watching this kind of structural breakdown his entire career. And he started warning about where we were headed back in December of 2005. Not 2007. Not 2008. December of 2005. At that point, the mainstream economic consensus was pure, confident, public optimism. And the reason they were optimistic is that their models had a fundamental blind spot built into them. Mainstream economics treats banks as pure middlemen. Simple pipes that move money from savers to borrowers. And if that is your model of how banks work, then the total level of credit in the system has no effect on economic activity whatsoever. That assumption meant they walked directly into 2008 without seeing it coming. So while the crash was building, while private debt was piling up at a rate that had never been seen in modern history, mainstream economists were going on television and saying 2008 was going to be a great year. A great year. Now let us talk about the political dimension that drove us here. Because the fantasy behind this decision was remarkably simple. Take out the Ayatollah. Take out the top leadership in one concentrated strike. And the theory was that once that happened, the whole structure would buckle. That they would look at what had just happened and conclude there was no path forward but to hand over what was being demanded. The problem with that theory is that it required Iran to have exactly the kind of brittle, personality-dependent leadership structure that the theory assumed. And it does not. These were not people unprepared for this scenario. They have spent years building a succession architecture specifically designed to keep the country functional regardless of what happens to any individual at the top. The Ayatollah is gone. A public replacement has not been confirmed yet. But the mechanism for replacing him is already running. The country is still being administered. The institutional machinery did not stop. The premise of the entire operation was wrong from the beginning. And now the political fallout is landing somewhere that nobody expected. Nick Fuentes. 24 years old. One of the most publicly, aggressively committed voices in the entire America First movement. Someone who built his platform on the idea that this administration was going to deliver what it promised. He has now come out and said it directly. He has been conned. Those are not my words. That is his word. Conned. When you lose the Nick Fuenteses, you are not losing a fringe voice. You are losing the part of the coalition that held the fire together. Because if they have arrived at Kand, the people who believe somewhat less hard arrived there a long time ago and just did not say it out loud yet. And here is where this story takes a turn that almost nobody in political media has fully absorbed yet. The original promise was regime change. Over there. Not here. The theory was that this operation would destabilize a foreign government, produce a new power structure, and deliver a strategic win. But look at what is actually happening. Rather than regime change in Iran coming out of this, what may actually be in motion right now is regime change in America. The loudest voices calling for this administration to be removed are not coming from the left. They are coming from the right. From the people who put this administration in power in the first place. From the base that was told it was getting a peace president, an economic relief president, a president who was going to fight for the working men. Those people are now saying this has to stop. The strongest energy pushing toward the exit door for this administration is flowing from inside its own house. And that brings us back to gold. Because the political dimension is not separate from the financial one. They are the same dimension. When you do not trust the political system, you buy gold. That is the rule. And right now you have an energy shock driving prices up, a stock market rolling over, and a political structure that its own supporters are beginning to abandon. Every one of those conditions points in the same direction. Gold is likely to perform strongly coming out of this environment. That is probably one of the more conservative statements you can make right now. Here is the economic wrinkle that makes this harder to read, not easier. There is a real question right now about whether the United States actually has the domestic production capacity to build the weapons it needs for the conflict it just started. Not the weapons it has stockpiled. The weapons it needs to sustain operations at the required rate over the required duration. And if the answer is no, which it may well be, then the response is going to be an appropriations bill through Congress. A large one. A bill that funds a rapid aggressive build-out of domestic weapons manufacturing. In economic terms, that is a fiscal stimulus. It creates jobs. It funds supply chains. It puts money into the economy at scale. The problem is the timing. Because that stimulus is going to land in an economy simultaneously absorbing an oil shock, dealing with supply chain disruptions, and facing rising input costs across every major sector. You are pouring accelerant onto a fire and calling it economic policy. It will take time before the weapons themselves come off the production line. But the money enters the system long before the weapons do. And money chasing constrained supply is just another name for inflation. This whole situation is going to be a mess. There is no clean read on any of this where one variable moves predictably in one direction. Every element is amplifying every other element. You are looking at a global recession forming from a supply chain seizure combined with a simultaneous surge in the value of hard assets, specifically the ones people buy when they have lost confidence in everything else. The direction for financial markets broadly is not complicated to call. They go down. Not because of any single company failing. Because of what a 20% oil spike in a political system generating new crisis faster than old crisis can be priced in means for the profitability of American industry as a whole. You are going to see a stock market decline. A significant one. And running opposite to it, you are going to see gold climb. Not in a straight line. But the direction is clear and the historical scale of what a setup like this produces in gold is not a small number. The 2000% reference point from 1973 is exactly that. A reference point. The economist at the center of this analysis has spent 55 years building a framework that runs directly against what is taught in mainstream institutions. His entire career has been a sustained argument that the mainstream gets it wrong because it starts with the wrong assumptions. He found the work of Hyman Minsky, an economist who argued that capitalism carries a built-in tendency toward debt-driven crisis. That stability itself breeds instability. The longer things appear calm, the more risk accumulates underneath the surface, and the harder the eventual correction hits. That became the foundation of his doctoral research. Here is the specific problem with the mainstream model. Standard economics treats banks as middlemen. Someone deposits money. The bank lends it to someone else. Total money in the system stays the same. It just moves. Under that model, tracking private debt tells you nothing about where the economy is going. Banks are pipes, not engines. That assumption is wrong. Banks do not just move existing money. They create new money when they issue loans. And when credit growth reverses, the demand it was creating disappears. That is how you produce a recession. In 2005, he looked at the private debt levels in both Australia and the United States and saw one unmistakable pattern. Private debt as a share of GDP was growing at an exponential rate in both countries. Exponential growth in a real system cannot continue indefinitely. At some point it stops. And when credit growth stops after a sustained exponential run, the contribution of credit to demand does not just plateau. It reverses. He looked at those numbers and said, a crash is coming. Not maybe. Coming. The mainstream saw those same conditions and said 2008 was going to be a great year. What arrived was a collapse in demand driven by the reversal of private credit. Not as deep as the 1930s because by 2008 government spending represented a much larger share of the economy than it did back then. But a severe globally coordinated financial crisis that the entire mainstream establishment failed to see from any direction. For that call, he received the Revere Award from the Real World Economics Review. Awarded to the economist whose work most clearly and most accurately warned of the crisis before it arrived. When it counted most, he was pointing the right direction. And he turned out to be right. That was nearly 20 years ago. And here is what the mainstream has done with those 20 years. Nothing. They updated nothing. They incorporated none of it. They treated 2008 as a black swan, an anomaly, an unpredictable external event rather than a structural outcome. And once markets recovered, they went straight back to the same framework. The same models. The same blind spots. Right now they are running the exact same analysis that had them calling 2008 a great year. Different numbers. Identical architecture. And we are watching the result in real time. One thing that is not ambiguous is the inflation outcome. When oil goes up the way it has gone up in the last few weeks, you do not avoid an inflation spike. That spike is already moving through supply chains. Already being priced into forward contracts for energy-dependent goods and services. In a matter of weeks to months it shows up at the register for every working family buying food, filling a tank, paying a utility bill. The working class and the middle class are going to feel this harder than anyone else. And here is the brutal context for that. The people about to absorb this inflation shock have already been absorbing economic damage for 40 to 50 years. Because wages in America, particularly for working class and middle class households, have not kept pace with productivity growth across that entire period. The economy got more productive. The output per worker went up. The worker did not see that gain in their paycheck. It went to the top of the income distribution. That is why they voted for the disruption. They were not wrong that they had been left behind. And now those same households are about to absorb an oil shock generated by a conflict they did not ask for. The midterms are still months away in November. But every week between now and then is another data point. Every price increase, every market drop, every headline about a conflict that has not delivered what was promised, lands in the political calculus of the voters this administration cannot afford to lose. Any action from this point forward is almost certainly going to accelerate the shift of political terrain toward the Democrats taking back ground. And the people inside the inner circle watching that electoral trajectory are not disinterested observers. They have personal reasons to be alarmed by what a change in power means for them. That fear does not produce rational behavior. It produces erratic behavior. And erratic behavior from people in positions of authority is one more source of instability in an environment that already has more than it can handle. This is what happens when you hand the machinery of the most powerful government on earth to someone with a narcissistic personality disorder and the political infrastructure to back it up. The first time around, there were limits. Not because of principle. Because the support structure for executing a radical agenda was not fully assembled yet. This time there was. The group behind America 2025 had spent years developing a comprehensive framework for reshaping every arm of the federal government. The people appointed to implement it were selected precisely for their alignment with that vision. The result is the cascade of decisions that have produced exactly this outcome. And the people who believed in this project most deeply are the ones now most visibly abandoning it. The highest conviction supporters, the ones who built their public identities around the idea that this was finally going to be different, those people are now producing the loudest calls for this to end. The base has not drifted. It has cracked. The force pushing hardest for a political reckoning is coming from inside the movement that created this administration. There is an old saying attributed to China, "May you live in interesting times." It sounds like a blessing. It was always a curse. We are living in times that are far too interesting for our own good. And the single most maddening thing about all of it is that there was no structural reason for this conflict to happen. This was a choice made by specific people for reasons that had nothing to do with the interests of the American people. The honest read of why those decisions were made points toward Israeli strategic objectives being pressed through American political channels and translated into American military action. This conflict is being conducted in service of those objectives. And that may have been a catastrophic miscalculation. Over the next 2 to 4 weeks, the trajectory becomes clearer. There are two paths. In the first path, the conflict does not escalate past a threshold that causes lasting structural damage. You get a significant recession, a painful commodities disruption, a political earthquake in the United States. Serious. Survivable. In the second path, military capacity on one side gets depleted to a point where what comes back cannot be absorbed. And when a nuclear-armed state reaches the point where it genuinely believes its survival is no longer assured through conventional means, the options on the table expand into territory that no financial model has ever been designed to price. That outcome is not the base case, but it is on the table. Subscribe to Crisis Watch. We will keep tracking this as it develops, because it is going to keep developing.